Okay, sure. So wifely obedience, the first thing that we have to establish is whether there is such a concept in Islam. And yes, there is such a concept in Islam because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض بما أنفقوا من أموالهم. فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله واللاتي تخافون نشوزهن فاعظوهن واهجروهن في المضاجع واضربوهن فإن أطعنكم فلا تبغوا عليهن سبيلا إن الله كان عليا كبيرا. So الرجال قوامون على النساء. How do we translate this? We translate this. People translate it in different ways, and they tried to capture some of the meanings of qiwama in their translations. So they translated this as the managers, the protectors, the maintainers. Men are in charge of women, protectors and maintainers sometimes, and maintainers sometimes, and both. But it is basically a position of both responsibility and authority because they come hand in hand. I mean, you can't expect people to be responsible without giving them some authority. So if they are the protectors and maintainers, they are also in charge and they're also the managers. So it is all of them together. But the way this, the linguistic roots of this have to do more with caretakers. It's like, Allah is Al-Qayyum. So because Allah is the one who maintains everything and He doesn't need anyone sort of to. The concept of Qayyum here is that Allah maintains the heavens and the earth and all creations and so on and so forth. And they come from the same root. So Al-Qiwama is both responsibility and authority at the same time, and they go hand in hand. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, because of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend, because of the two, not just one, because of both. So at the end of the day, someone will have to be the ultimate decider, as George Bush said, which turned out to be a correct word, I guess. Someone will end up being the ultimate decider after mutual consultation and all of that. And God had given men that right, which we will discuss later to talk about the scope of that right and the exceptions and contingencies and all of that. We will discuss this in detail, inshallah. But yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الرجال قوامون على النساء. There is some position of authority here that comes with the responsibility that Allah had placed on men. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إذا صلت المرأة خمسها وصامت شهرها وحفظت فرجها وأطاعت زوجها قيل لها ادخلي الجنة من أي أبواب الجنة شئتِ. And I'm quite sure that women are familiar with this hadith as well. If the woman prayed her 5 daily prayers, fasted her month of Ramadan, and maintained her chastity and obeyed her husband, it will be said to her, enter paradise from whichever gate you please. And that's darajat as-siddiqeen. That it will say, there is another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said Abu Bakr will be called from all the gates of paradise. So a woman can reach darajat as-siddiqeen, or that level of siddiqiyya, just by praying the 5 daily prayers and fasting the month of Ramadan and maintaining her chastity and obeying her husband, because that is not easy. That is not easy. And there's a recognition here. Now, Ta'a or obedience does not mean like that there is like it's so like a military unit where someone is given orders all the time and someone is receiving orders. That doesn't work, and a marriage would not work like this. And most of the reasonable men, they rarely give orders, extremely rarely give orders to their wives. They may hold the right to make the final decision concerning more important issues. They are not going to tell her, I want the couch here, and I want the armchair there, and I want this to be yellow, and I want people who abuse that right, people who overspend, if they have like some capital, they overspend from it, they'll lose it. But at some point he may say, no, I think that, we should move to Kentucky because there is this good Islamic school, or there is, and certainly if there are no prenuptial agreement, that we don't move, because those prenuptial agreements also would prevent him from that. If there is no such agreement, then he may say, no, I think that my kids should go to that Islamic school. And if there is, certainly after mutual consultation, after deliberation, after all of this, but at one point he may have the right, or he does have the right to say, no, I think the kids should go to that school. So that's the ta'a, that's establishing the concept in general. The concept of ta'a in general. Yes, that concept does exist. Now, there are two issues that we need to discuss. The scope, which we will keep for later, but first, ta'a in general, to anyone other than Allah and His Messenger, what does that mean? What does ta'a in general mean? So ta'a in Islam has been used in different contexts. In the context of obeying Allah and His Messenger, and that's absolute ta'a, and it's absolute with Allah, with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With regard to the Messenger, it's because we believe that He is the infallible messenger of God, and He's relaying to us a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then aside from that, there is ta'at ulil amr, the people in charge, the people in authority. There is ta'at al-walidain, obeying the parents, and there is ta'at al-zawj, obeying the husband. So ta'a in general, aside from the ta'a of Allah and His Messenger, in general, it has contingencies. What are those contingencies? Ali radiallahu anhu said in a hadith that's reported by Bukhari and Muslim, he relates from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam that he said, لا طاعة في معصية الله إنما الطاعة في المعروف. There is no obedience at the expense of disobeying Allah, or in disobeying Allah. There is no obedience. Obedience should only be given to that which is ma'ruf. What is ma'ruf? If you look at the translations of ma'ruf, they will translate this as good. They translate this as good and reasonable. They translate this as good and universally recognized. Because ma'ruf comes from arafah, to know. So it is universally recognized. In other words, sensible. Sensible according to whom? According to the majority of sensible people. Sane people, that's how we define this. So what does that hadith mean? That hadith means, first, that if the husband orders his wife, commands his wife to do something haram, she should not listen to him. It's not like that she doesn't have to. She should not listen to him. If he orders her to do something that is makruh or dubious, then there's some controversy here. But let us keep this for later, because we will talk about the scope of obedience to the husband, because it is not like the scope of obedience to the parents. It is different from the scope of obedience to the parents. It is stronger but narrower, and we will explain this later. So if the husband, for instance, tells his wife to not do any nafil prayers or something like this, she doesn't need to listen to him. If he tells her don't do the nafil or the sunnah after dhuhr because we need to go somewhere or do something, then she would listen to him that one time. If he needs something that's pertinent to marriage, then there is so this is the part about la ta'a fi ma'siyatillah, no obedience in disobeying Allah or at the expense of disobeying Allah. So what about ma'ruf? Ma'ruf means three things. In order for something to be ma'ruf, it should be doable, because la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. It should be harmless, because again, the Prophet ﷺ said, La darar wa la dirar. There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. It should be also purposeful, which is extremely important, purposeful. And now we're not just talking about the wife and husband. We're talking about the child and the parent. If the parent orders the child to do something purposeless, senseless, the child does not need to listen because it is senseless. In fact, Imam Ibn Hajar said that I have seen of some parents with regard to their children things that are utterly senseless, making anyone hearing them or hearing about them pardon the child and blame the parent. The same Imam Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, rahimahullah, not al-Asqalani, but al-Haytami, rahimahullah, said, if the child does not need to listen to his father if he basically commands him to follow his madhab. For this, when devoid of a good reason, is basically foolishness. So he said, وَبِهَذَا يُعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا يَلْزَمُ الْوَلَدَ امْتِثَالُ أمر والده بالتزام مذهبه لأن ذاك حين لا غرض فيه صحيح مجرد حمق. إذا لم يكن فيه غرض صحيح مجرد حمق. So this is the child with the parent now. So if the parent says to the child, follow this madhab or that madhab, the child does not need does not have to listen. If there is no point in the command, he does not have to listen. Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah added a very important contingency here. He said that the child should obey the parents, and we're talking about ta'a in general here, we're going to come to the wife and husband later, that the child should obey his parents, even if they're fasiq, and that's the clear statement of Imam, or the apparent meaning of the statement of Imam Ahmad. But then he adds, this pertains though to that which bears benefit to them and no harm to him. That which bears benefit to them and no harm to him. So in order for something to be purposeful, it has to have a benefit for the person, for the orderer, or the person who made the order. It should not be senseless. So a husband, for instance, cannot say to his wife, face the wall and raise your hands. Because that's senseless. And, many things that would not be of benefit for the husband or may cause harm to the wife, or may just have no purpose in them. These are not orders to be obeyed. One of them is this order, because we've talked about ta'a in general, and we've talked about ta'a to those that have a position of leadership in general. Aside from Allah and His Messenger, there are contingencies. Those contingencies should not be ma'asiyah. They should not ask you to abandon even a sunnah all the time. It's controversial whether they can ask you to do makruh or something that's dubious or not, but it should also be, harmless. It should be doable, and it should be purposeful. And purposeful will be determined by the people who, purposeful will be determined by sensible people. And we may come to discuss this in greater detail after I address the issue of the scope of wifely obedience, because the scope is important. So now that we have said that these are contingencies that apply to any ta'a or any obedience to any authority figure, particularly those who are in charge, those who are in authority, parents, husbands, and so on. When it comes to wife and husband in particular, because the wife is not the child of the husband. And although many scholars have stated clearly that haqq al-zawj, or the right of the husband, supersedes haqq al-walid, or the father or the mother, or the right of the parent, that is correct if there is a conflict, because now this is a new family now. And, this is not just an Islamic thing, but this is a new family that has its own sort of priorities. And if the parents intervene, that will cause problems. So it is natural that this nuclear family now will have to have its priorities and will have to basically prioritize their well-being as a family. So Lajnat al-Fatwa in Al-Azhar during the time of Sheikh Lajnat al-Fatwa in Al-Azhar during the time of Sheikh Abdul Majid Salim, they got that question about, which right is superior, the right of the husband or the right of the parent, and they said it's the right of the husband. However, we must caution here that this is in the case of conflict. Father wants her to do something, the husband wants her to do something else. What should she do? The right of the husband is superior here. But the right of the husband is narrower than the right of the father, because the obedience to parents is just because they are parents. But the obedience to the husband is because of the contract. There is a contract. Marriage is a contract, and it's a contractual relationship. It is not a parental relationship. It is a contractual relationship, and therefore the obedience to the husband is narrower in scope than obedience to the parents. And there is a particular book that addressed this in some detail, the issue of the scope of wifely obedience. The book is a book by Sheikh Atiyah Saqr, who was also like a member of the Fatwa Committee of Al-Azhar, and he was a very, very distinguished scholar, a very good and distinguished scholar. He wrote a book called Encyclopedia of the Family Under the Care of Islam, موسوعة الأسرة تحت رعاية الإسلام. And in this book, he mentioned that the scope, there could be 4 ways to imagine the scope of obedience, and he mentioned scholarly statements that support each one, not each one of the 4, but each one of the 3. One, he said we should completely discard, which is the cultural perspective that the wife needs to obey the husband all the time. You just throw away that because that's, senseless. But the 3 that he said can be supported by scholarly statements are 1, and going from the widest to the narrowest now. 1, she should obey the husband in everything, that is good and reasonable. Just like the hadith says, good and reasonable. The second narrows the scope. And the second, you could find supporting statements from scholars. For instance, Ibn al-Jaym al-Hanafi, in his book Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, says that a woman does not have to obey her husband in all matters. The obedience only applies to those that pertain to marriage and matters relate to marriage. إنما ذلك فيما يرجع إلى النكاح وتوابعه. إنما ذلك فيما يرجع إلى النكاح وتوابعه. So matters that that pertain to marriage and related to marriage. So that's sort of a little bit narrower. The narrowest is supported by several statements by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, where he clearly said in several places of Sharh Muslim, his commentary on Muslim, that a wife, that the obedience that is completely binding, although he does mention that good women have been obedient in much more than that, and have always, been extending their obedience and their service to their families and their husbands in much more than that. But he said that when it comes to the contract of marriage and what the contract makes binding on women, obedience applies to 2 areas only. 1, his right to intimacy. 2, leaving his home. She has to seek his permission to leave his home, and he has the right to intimacy, certainly with certain exceptions that we may discuss if you want. But that goes back, we go back now and say that when the husband tells the wife, do this, and the wife says it's not sensible, we have to first ask ourselves, does it apply to marriage, or is it just an order that doesn't have anything to do with the marital relationship and the family life? We said that there are 3 different sort of levels of obedience here. The one in the middle, this 1 we will discard, 3 we will keep with us. The woman who wants to be the ideal wife, the greatest wife, is the woman who will just obey her husband in all things, as long as she will forget about the scope. She'll just obey her husband in all things, as long as the command is good and reasonable. The second level, which is the middle level, she will obey her husband in all things that pertain to family life. The third, which is the narrowest and the most binding, obey him with regard to 2 matters: the right to intimacy and not leaving his home without his permission. So if the woman chose that she will obey only with regard to the narrowest scope, which could make life a little bit more difficult, but she would not be at fault, at least according to some of the Muslim scholars and, part of our heritage. Then if he gives her a command that does not pertain to these issues, she may say, well, I don't have to listen. But if, let us say, he tells her to brush the kids' teeth every night before they go to bed, does this fall under, right to intimacy and, not leaving his home without his permission? No. Does this fall under family life? Yes. So if she decided that she will obey within that sort of category, then is brushing the kids' teeth every night something most sensible people would find good would find reasonable, yes or no, then we have to determine if the answer to this is yes or no. But if there is dispute, then we have 5 different levels to determine the right answer. One is Shara. Did the Shara address this issue? And did the Shara tell us what's good here? If not, we have something called the Shart. If there is a prenuptial agreement about this to determine what's right, Shart. Al-Muslimuna ala shurutihim. Muslims are bound by their conditions, except for a condition that makes halal what's haram and haram that's what is halal. The third is al-urf, which are customs, people's customs. There is a legal principle that says ما لم يحدده الشرع يرجع فيه إلى العرف. That which is not specified by the Shara should be determined by people's customs. Okay, that didn't work. Then we have a sulh, which is basically reconciliation through arbitration. We have arbitrators, we bring arbitrators from حكما من أهله وحكما من أهلها, sent to them like an arbitrator from her family and an arbitrator from his family. If that does not resolve the problem, then qada, which is, litigation, to go to court, to decide for us. Certainly it is hoped that most of our disagreements can be resolved without going through those 5 levels.